The presiding judge's gavel had barely fallen, sentencing the teenage boy who had stabbed his own father to death, when the entire courtroom went deathly silent, as though all the air had suddenly been drained from the room. Then, from the front row, a disheveled woman with tangled hair and an ashen face sprang to her feet like a tightly compressed spring finally released. She rushed toward the defendant's dock, her eyes wild with panic and brimming with tears. "No, it wasn't him. I was the one who killed his father." No one had time to react. Heads turned toward her, some in shock, others shaking in disbelief. The judge slammed his gavel down.
"Order, this is a court of law, not a place where you can say whatever you please. Do you understand what you are saying?"
The woman nodded. Tears streamed down her face, and her voice was hoarse. "I do, and I am prepared to accept the consequences. But I have to tell the truth. Otherwise, I will carry this secret with me to the grave." And under the stunned gaze of everyone in the courtroom, she began her story. Many years earlier, she had been a young woman who married at the age of 20. Life was desperately poor, and the couple struggled simply to put food on the table. Her husband repaired tires by the roadside. Competition was fierce, customers gradually became scarce, and his earnings were barely enough to survive. Alcohol replaced meals. Curses replaced words of affection. Whenever he came home after another unsuccessful day, he took out his anger on his wife, striking her as though she were nothing more than a lifeless punching bag. But she was not a punching bag. She was a woman with a heart, a vulnerable heart that longed for comfort and yearned to be loved. Then another man entered her life. He worked as an itinerant pig butcher. He was powerfully built, with a rough manner of speaking, yet there was something dangerously gentle about his eyes. Whenever he received leftover organs, blood, or meat after slaughtering a pig, he would bring them to her house. He invited her husband to cook the food with him and would bring along some alcohol. Before long, the two men became drinking companions. As time passed, she began to find him increasingly attractive. It started with glances exchanged in the corner of the kitchen, followed by seemingly accidental touches. The two gradually became closer. Eventually, their relationship became an affair, carried out secretly during afternoons when her husband was away. She knew she was descending deeper and deeper into the pit of desire. But she could not resist. Then one day, the truth came out. Her drunken husband pointed at the other man and hurled insults at him, calling him a scoundrel and a bastard. Her lover glared back, pulled out his butcher's knife, and growled,
"I'll slit your throat just like I slit a pig's."
Her husband was not afraid. The two men lunged at each other and struggled. The knife flashed. Blood spilled. There was a terrible scream. And then silence. Her husband collapsed, his eyes wide open. With his final breaths, broken curses escaped from his bloodied throat.
"You will die, just as you killed me, you damned butcher."
That night, the two buried her husband behind the garden. Then they fled to the south. They changed their names and began new lives. Several years later, they had a son and believed this child represented a new beginning. But the boy never learned to speak or walk. He crawled around all day. His eyes often had a strange, vacant appearance, and his body seemed unusually heavy. Sometimes when the woman looked at him, she could not help thinking of the pigs her husband used to slaughter, especially because of those eyes. A fortune teller told them that a restless spirit was haunting the family because her husband had killed so many pigs. They were told to perform rituals to appease the spirits. So they arranged ceremonies and invited ritual practitioners to chant continuously for 3 days and 3 nights. Afterward, something astonishing happened. The child suddenly managed to stand. Gradually, he learned to walk until eventually he could move around like any other person. But he still could not speak. All he could produce were indistinct sounds, cries, and strange shouts. The family carried on as though the past had never existed. The former butcher, now legally her husband, loved his wife and adored their son. At night, he would sometimes crawl around the floor pretending to be a horse, so his son could ride on his back. The house would fill with laughter as the boy made his meaningless sounds. And so the years passed peacefully. Until one night, laughter was once again echoing through the house. Father and son were playing happily when suddenly the boy, now a teenager, shot to his feet. He staggered several steps toward the wall and grabbed the butcher's knife hanging there. Then he shrieked the first words he had ever spoken in his life.
You will die just as you killed me. You damned butcher.
Before the man could even turn around, the knife struck him in the neck. Blood spilled across the floor, eerily recreating the scene from that terrible night many years before. The man collapsed. His eyes remained wide open. The boy burst into wild laughter, his vacant eyes looking uncannily like those of the man who had died more than a decade earlier. The woman stood frozen. She was overwhelmed by terror and grief. Could the spirit of her first husband have entered her son? Could this be the judgment for the mistakes they had committed so many years ago? By the time the woman finished telling her story, the entire courtroom was stunned into silence. She collapsed to her knees as tears streamed down her face. Those who witnessed her confession became increasingly troubled by difficult questions. Who, then, was truly guilty? How could the court deliver a judgment that was genuinely fair? Gradually, they came to understand that regardless of what judgment the court ultimately delivered, everything would eventually face its own measure of justice. For beyond the laws written by human beings, there remains another law at work, the law of karma.